My husband brought me gifts from Europe, perfumes, chocolates, luxury bags. After a family dinner, it all vanished. Then my daughter-in-law posted photos with my bag. I called my son. My wife said she'd use it more than you, so I gave her everything. That's when my husband lost. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me back up to explain how we got here, because honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. 3 weeks ago, my husband George returned from his business trip to Europe with arms full of gifts that made my heart sing. Chanel perfume from France, Swiss chocolates that probably cost more than some people's rent, Italian leather gloves so buttery soft they felt like heaven, and that stunning Hermes bag that made me feel like I was 25 again instead of 64. George had been planning this trip for months, and he'd promised to bring me something special from each country he visited. "Eleanor, close your eyes," he'd said when he walked through our front door, his suitcase still by his feet. I'd giggled like a schoolgirl. Yes, at 64, I still giggle, and obediently shut my eyes while he arranged everything on our kitchen counter. When I opened them, I nearly cried. Each gift was wrapped in tissue paper from boutiques I'd only dreamed of shopping in. The perfume came with a handwritten note from the sales associate in Paris. The chocolates were nestled in a wooden box that smelled like cedar and sophistication. And that bag, oh that bag, came with authenticity papers and a care card that made me feel like royalty. "George, this is too much," I'd whispered, running my fingers over the butter-soft leather of the Hermes bag. He just smiled that crooked smile that made me fall in love with him 42 years ago and said, "Nothing's too much for my girl." I'd spent the next few days carrying that bag everywhere, feeling more confident than I had in years. At the grocery store, at book club, even to my doctor's appointment, that bag made me stand a little taller and smile a little brighter. Other women noticed it too. Sarah at the bank complimented the leather. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson asked where I'd gotten it. I'd felt proud telling them it was a gift from my traveling husband. But 3 days after George returned, we hosted our monthly family dinner. Michael, our 38-year-old son, came with Jessica, his wife of 3 years. Jessica had seemed particularly interested in everything George had brought back, asking detailed questions about each store, each purchase, even asking to see the receipts because she was planning her own European trip. I should have known something was wrong when she spent more time examining my gifts than eating the roast beef I'd spent all afternoon preparing. The morning after that dinner, I went to get my bag for a ladies' lunch, and it was gone. Not just the bag, everything was gone. The perfume, the chocolates, the gloves, even the tissue paper and shopping bags. I tore apart my bedroom, thinking maybe George had moved everything for some reason. I checked the closets, under the bed, even in the laundry room, though why European luxury goods would be in there was beyond me. "George!" I'd called out, my voice echoing through our empty house. He was at work, of course, probably in some important meeting, completely unaware that his carefully chosen gifts had vanished into thin air. I'd stood in our bedroom, staring at the empty space on my dresser where everything had been displayed, feeling like I was losing my mind. That's when I remembered something odd. When Jessica was leaving the night before, she'd been carrying a large shopping bag I hadn't seen her bring in. At the time, I'd assumed she'd picked up something from our house that she'd forgotten on an earlier visit, maybe a book or some leftover food. But now, standing in my empty bedroom, that shopping bag took on a much more sinister significance. My phone was in my hand before I'd fully processed what I was thinking. I scrolled through Jessica's Instagram account, something I rarely did because most of her posts made me feel ancient and out of touch. But there it was, posted just 2 hours ago, a selfie of Jessica in a coffee shop, and there, hanging from her chair, was my bag, my beautiful, irreplaceable, meant-for-me Hermes bag. The caption read, "Feeling grateful for beautiful gifts from family. Blessed, luxury, family love." The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She was flaunting it, acting like my husband's thoughtful gift to his wife was somehow hers to claim. I'd stared at that photo for a full 5 minutes, screenshotting it before she could delete it, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief. That's when I called Michael. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound upset." Michael's voice had that careful tone he used when he thought I was about to complain about something trivial, like the time I'd mentioned that Jessica never thanked me for the birthday gift I'd spent weeks selecting, or when I'd gently suggested that maybe family dinners could occasionally happen at their house instead of always at ours. "Michael, I need you to explain something to me. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the screenshot of Jessica wearing my bag, trying to keep my voice level. Your father brought me gifts from Europe, beautiful, expensive gifts, and now they're all missing. Missing? What do you mean missing? I mean gone. Michael, vanished. Every single thing your father brought me. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, that particular rhythm that meant he was thinking about what to say next, including the Hermes bag that's currently featured on your wife's Instagram account. The silence that followed was telling. Not the silence of confusion or concern, but the silence of someone who'd been caught red-handed and was trying to figure out how to spin the situation. Oh, he finally said. That. Oh, that. Like my husband's thoughtful gifts were just that. Like the theft of my personal belongings was a minor inconvenience that I should simply overlook. Yes, Michael, that. Would you care to explain how my bag ended up on your wife's social media account? Another pause. Then, in a tone that suggested I was being unreasonable for even asking, Jessica really loved that bag, Mom. She doesn't have anything that nice, and she'd been looking at Hermes bags online for months. When she mentioned how beautiful it was, I told her she could have it. The casual way he said it, like he was talking about lending out a book or sharing a dessert, made my vision blur with rage. I had to sit down on one of my kitchen stools before I fell down. You told her she could have it, I repeated slowly. My bag, that your father brought specifically for me, from Paris. You gave it to your wife. Well, yeah. I mean, you have other bags, Mom. And Jessica would get more use out of it than you would. She goes to networking events and business dinners. When do you ever go anywhere that requires a bag like that? When do I ever go anywhere? As if my life was so small and insignificant that I didn't deserve beautiful things. As if reaching 64 somehow disqualified me from owning anything luxurious or special. And the perfume? I asked, my voice getting dangerously quiet. The chocolates? The gloves? Did Jessica need those more than I would too? She took the perfume because she's never owned anything from Chanel. The chocolates were going to go bad anyway. You're always watching your sugar. And the gloves. He trailed off, probably realizing how ridiculous this was all starting to sound. Let me see if I understand this correctly, I said, standing up and beginning to pace around my kitchen island. Your father spent thousands of dollars on gifts specifically chosen for his wife. That's me, in case you've forgotten. And you decided that your wife deserved them more. It's not like that, Mom. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. I was being dramatic for being upset that my own son had essentially robbed me. The same son I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, driven to soccer practice and piano lessons and college interviews. The son whose wedding I'd helped pay for, whose house down payment I'd contributed to, whose life I'd supported in every way a mother could. What's not like that, Michael? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. Look, Jessica saw the stuff and really loved it. She doesn't have family who can afford to give her things like that. Her parents are teachers, Mom. They can't just fly to Europe and buy luxury goods. And there it was. The implication that because George and I had worked hard our entire lives, because we'd saved and invested and been careful with our money, we somehow owed our success to others. The suggestion that because we could afford nice things, those nice things weren't really ours to keep. So, because Jessica's family has less money, she's entitled to my husband's gifts to me? You're twisting this around. I'm just saying that you could be more generous, more understanding of other people's situations. Generous. I'd been generous my entire adult life. Generous with my time, my money, my love, my support. I'd given Michael everything he'd ever asked for, and plenty he hadn't. I'd welcomed Jessica into our family with open arms, included her in every holiday and celebration, treated her like the daughter I'd never had. And this was how that generosity was repaid. Michael, I want my things back. What? You heard me. I want my bag, my perfume, my chocolates, and my gloves. Today. Mom, you can't be serious. Jessica's already been using the perfume. The chocolates are probably gone, and she's planning to take the bag to her company's annual dinner next week. Then she'll have to make other plans. This is ridiculous. You're being selfish over material things. Selfish. The woman who'd raised him alone for 3 months when George was deployed overseas was selfish. The woman who'd taken care of her mother-in-law for 5 years until she passed was selfish. The woman who'd never asked for anything in return for decades of putting her family first was selfish for wanting to keep the gifts her husband had bought her. Michael, I said, my voice deadly calm now. If those items aren't returned to this house by 6 o'clock tonight, I'm calling the police. The police? Mom, these are family matters. You can't call the police on family. Watch me. I hung up the phone and immediately called George. Eleanor, slow down. What do you mean everything's missing? George's voice crackled through my phone from his office downtown. I could hear the confusion and concern, but also that slightly distracted tone that meant he was trying to process what I was saying while simultaneously dealing with whatever crisis was currently consuming his workday. I mean exactly what I said, George. Every single gift you brought me from Europe is gone. Michael gave them to Jessica because apparently I don't deserve beautiful things, and his wife needs them more than the woman you actually bought them for. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could picture George sitting in his corner office, probably pulling off his reading glasses and rubbing his temples the way he did when he was trying to control his temper. He what? The words came out low and measured, which anyone who knew George understood was far more dangerous than if he'd been shouting. Our son decided that because Jessica doesn't have family with money, she was entitled to my Hermes bag, my Chanel perfume, and everything else. He actually told me I was being selfish for wanting my own gifts back. That little... George caught himself before finishing that sentence, but I knew exactly what word he'd been about to use. I'm coming home. George, you don't have to leave work early for this. Like hell I don't. I spent 3 weeks planning those purchases, Eleanor. I went to 4 different countries and hand-selected items I thought would make you smile. I have the receipts, the authenticity certificates, everything. And our son thinks he can just redistribute my gifts like he's running a charity drive? I'd heard George angry before, but this was different. This was the cold, controlled fury that he usually reserved for business deals gone wrong or contractors who tried to cheat him. It was the voice he used when someone had made the mistake of underestimating him. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Don't call Michael back. Don't do anything. I'll handle this. While I waited for George to get home, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called Jessica directly. I'd never had her personal cell phone number memorized, but it was saved in my contacts from all the times she'd texted me about dinner plans or family events. Hi, Eleanor. Jessica's voice was bright and cheerful, like she didn't have a care in the world, like she wasn't currently in possession of stolen goods. What's up, Jessica? I think there's been some confusion about the gifts George brought me from Europe. Oh, her tone shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. What kind of confusion? The kind where they ended up in your possession instead of mine. A pause. Then, oh, that. Michael said it was okay. He said you wouldn't mind sharing. Sharing. Like I was a toddler who needed to learn to play nicely with others. Like the concept of personal property was somehow foreign to me. Jessica, those were gifts from my husband to me. They weren't meant to be shared. But Eleanor, you have so many nice things already. And I really, really love that bag. I've never owned anything so beautiful in my entire life. Her voice took on a wheedling quality that I recognized from my years of teaching elementary school. It was the voice children used when they'd been caught doing something wrong but thought they could charm their way out of consequences. I understand that you like the bag, Jessica, but it's mine. Can't you just let me borrow it? Just for a few weeks? I promise I'll take really good care of it. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd stolen my belongings, flaunted them on social media, and now she wanted to negotiate borrowing terms, like we were discussing a library book. No, Jessica. I want all of my things returned immediately. That's really selfish, Eleanor. I thought you were more generous than that. And there it was again. That word, selfish. As if wanting to keep my own possessions was somehow morally deficient. Jessica, if my things aren't returned by 6 o'clock tonight, I'm reporting them stolen. You wouldn't call the police on your own family. Try me. I hung up just as I heard George's car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched him get out of his BMW, his movements sharp and purposeful. He was still wearing his business suit, but he'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. George only rolled up his sleeves when he was preparing for a fight. Where's my phone? He asked the moment he walked through the door. Not bothering with hello or how was your day? George, maybe we should... Where's my phone, Eleanor? I pointed to the counter where he'd left it that morning. George grabbed it and scrolled through his contacts with the efficiency of a man on a mission. Michael, he said when the call connected. His voice was calm, conversational even, which somehow made it more threatening. I understand you've been redistributing gifts that I purchased for your mother. I couldn't hear Michael's response, but I could see George's jaw tightening with each passing second. No, son, I'm going to stop you right there, George interrupted. I don't care what Jessica wants. I don't care what you think is fair. I don't care about anyone's feelings except your mother's. Those gifts cost me over $8,000, and they were purchased specifically for Eleanor. $8,000. I'd had no idea George had spent that much. No wonder he was furious. You have exactly 2 hours to return every single item to this house, George continued. And I mean everything, Michael. The bag, the perfume, the chocolates, even the tissue paper and shopping bags. If anything is missing or damaged, you'll be replacing it at full retail price. Another pause as Michael responded. No, this isn't negotiable. And if I don't see those items by 6 o'clock, I'll be calling my attorney to discuss whether what you've done constitutes theft under Virginia law. George hung up and looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen in our 42 years of marriage, pure, unadulterated rage. $8,000? I asked quietly. That's just the bag and the perfume. The chocolates were another $300, and the gloves were $500. He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the neat style he maintained for work. I wanted to give you something special, Eleanor. Something that would make you feel as beautiful as you are. I started crying then, not from sadness, but from relief. Relief that my husband understood what his gifts had meant to me. Relief that he was as outraged as I was. Relief that I wasn't crazy for feeling violated and disrespected. They think I'm selfish for wanting to keep my own things, I said through my tears. You're not selfish, honey. You're the most generous woman I know. Too generous sometimes. George pulled me into his arms. But this stops now. They've taken advantage of your kindness for the last time. That's when my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Mom, Dad's being unreasonable. Michael's voice was tight with frustration. $8,000? There's no way that bag cost $8,000. I put the phone on speaker so George could hear. Would you like to see the receipt, Michael? Because I have it right here in my desk drawer. This is insane. It's just a purse. It's not just a purse, George said, his voice deadly quiet. It's a Hermes Birkin bag that I had to wait 3 months to get from their Paris boutique. It's a perfume that's limited edition and costs more than most people's weekly salary. And it's a gesture of love from a husband to his wife that your entitled wife decided she deserved more. Jessica's not entitled. She just doesn't have— Jessica doesn't have what, Michael? I interrupted. She doesn't have a job that pays her $70,000 a year. She doesn't have a house that we helped you buy. She doesn't have in-laws who've welcomed her with open arms and included her in everything. That's different. How is it different? Because you and Dad have everything you need. You don't need expensive bags and perfume to be happy. I had to sit down again. The casual dismissal of my right to enjoy beautiful things simply because I was older, because I was comfortable, because I'd worked hard my entire life to reach a point where my husband could afford to buy me gifts like these. It was breathtaking in its cruelty. Michael, George said, and I could hear him struggling to control his temper. Let me explain something to you that your mother is too polite to say. Those gifts weren't necessities. They were luxuries. They were meant to make your mother feel special and loved and appreciated. When you gave them to Jessica, you took away your mother's joy and gave it to someone else. That's not generosity. That's theft. It's not theft when it's family. Actually, son, legally speaking, it is. The value of those items puts this in felony territory. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Finally, Michael spoke again, and his tone had shifted from defensive to calculating. You're really going to threaten your own son with jail time over some material possessions? I'm going to protect my wife from being taken advantage of by people who should love and respect her. Fine, we'll bring the stuff back, but don't expect Jessica to be happy about it. I don't care if Jessica's happy about it, I said, finding my voice again. Jessica's happiness is not my responsibility. You're going to destroy our relationship over this. No, Michael, you destroyed our relationship when you decided your wife's wants were more important than your mother's rights. After Michael hung up, George and I sat in our kitchen in silence for several minutes. I was emotionally exhausted, and George looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 2 hours. How did we raise someone so entitled? I asked finally. I've been asking myself the same question. George reached across the table and took my hand. Maybe we gave him too much. Maybe we never taught him to respect other people's boundaries. Or maybe Jessica's influence is stronger than our 38 years of parenting. At 5:30, exactly 30 minutes before George's deadline, Michael's car pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I could see Jessica in the passenger seat, her arms crossed and her face turned away from our house like a sulking child. Michael got out and opened the trunk, removing 2 shopping bags. Jessica remained in the car. When I opened the front door, Michael brushed past me without a word and set the bags on our kitchen counter. George examined the contents methodically, checking each item against the receipts he'd retrieved from his desk. The perfume's been opened, George observed. Jessica used it once, Michael said defensively. It's barely touched. And the chocolates? She ate a few, but most of them are still there. George's face was granite. So Jessica helped herself to your mother's gifts, used them, consumed them, and now you're returning what's left like we should be grateful. Look, Dad, we're returning everything. Isn't that what you wanted? What I wanted was for my son to respect his mother enough not to steal from her in the first place. We didn't steal anything. We borrowed. Borrowing implies permission was asked and granted, I said. Taking someone's belongings without their knowledge and then using them is stealing. Michael's face flushed red. You know what? Fine. You want to be petty about this? Go ahead. But don't call us when you need help with something. Don't expect us at family dinners. And don't expect to see your future grandchildren if you keep treating Jessica like she's not part of this family. The threat about grandchildren hit me like a physical blow. Michael knew exactly where to aim to cause the most damage. Are you blackmailing me? I asked quietly. I'm explaining consequences. If you can't treat my wife with respect and generosity, then maybe we need some distance. George stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. Get out! What? Get out of my house. Now, Dad. I didn't mean. You meant every word. You just threatened to withhold our future grandchildren because we wouldn't let your wife keep stolen property. Get out. Michael looked like he wanted to argue, but something in George's expression must have warned him off. He headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one final blow. This isn't over. Jessica's really hurt by this, and I won't stand by and watch you treat her badly. After they left, I carefully unpacked my returned gift. The perfume bottle had fingerprints on it. The chocolate box was missing several pieces. The bag showed signs of wear from just one day of use. But what hurt most wasn't the condition of the returned items. It was the realization that this conflict had revealed something fundamental about my relationship with my son, something that couldn't be fixed by returning a purse or replacing eaten chocolates. George, I said quietly, I think we're about to lose our son. No, Eleanor, we lost him a long time ago. We just didn't want to admit it. The silence from Michael and Jessica lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, my phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. I was in my garden, deadheading my roses and trying to pretend that my heart wasn't breaking, when Jessica's name appeared on my screen. Eleanor, we need to talk. No greeting, no pleasantries. Jessica's voice was cold and controlled, completely different from the sweet, accommodating tone she'd used for the past 3 years. About what, Jessica? About the fact that you've completely humiliated me in front of my friends and coworkers. I straightened up, pulling off my gardening gloves. I'm not sure what you mean. I had to cancel my appearance at our company's annual dinner because I no longer have an appropriate bag. My boss asked me about the beautiful Hermes bag I'd posted on Instagram, and I had to explain that my mother-in-law took it back. Do you have any idea how that made me look? The audacity was stunning. She was calling me to complain about being embarrassed by having to return stolen property. Jessica, that bag was never yours to begin with, but you could have let me keep it. You could have been generous and understanding. Instead, you made me look like a fool. You made yourself look like a fool when you posted pictures of my bag on social media. It's just a bag, Eleanor. Just a material thing. I thought you were more evolved than to be so possessive about objects. Just a bag. The same dismissive attitude Michael had shown. The same casual disregard for what those gifts meant to me. If it's just a bag, Jessica, then you shouldn't have any problem living without it. That's not the point. The point is that you chose a purse over family harmony. You chose material possessions over your relationship with your son's wife. I walked back toward my house, needing to be inside for this conversation. Through the kitchen window, I could see George reading his morning paper, blissfully unaware that the battle was about to resume. Jessica, let me ask you something. If your mother gave your father an expensive watch for his birthday, and I decided I liked it and took it home with me, how would you feel? That's completely different. How is it different? Because it just is. You and George have everything. You don't need anything. There it was again. The assumption that because George and I had worked hard and been successful, we'd somehow forfeited our right to enjoy the fruits of our labor. Jessica, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. The value of those gifts wasn't in the money George spent. It was in the thought behind them. It was in knowing that my husband was thinking of me while he was thousands of miles away. It was in the fact that he took time from his business trip to find things that would make me smile. When you took those gifts, you took away that joy. You stole my happiness. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being honest. And here's something else I'm going to be honest about. For 3 years, I've watched you take and take and take from this family. You've taken our financial help, our time, our emotional support, our inclusion in every holiday and celebration, and you've given back exactly nothing except criticism and demands for more. The silence on the other end was deafening. That's not true, Jessica finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you invited George and me to your house for dinner? When was the last time you asked how we were doing instead of telling us what you needed? When was the last time you expressed genuine gratitude for anything we've done for you? We've been busy. You know how it is with work and everything. Too busy to call your mother-in-law on her birthday? Too busy to send a thank you note for the Christmas gifts? Too busy to help when I was sick with pneumonia last spring? Each example hit its mark. I could hear Jessica's breathing getting shallow and quick. You're attacking me, she said defensively. I'm stating facts. And here's another fact. Jessica, I'm done. I'm done pretending that your behavior is acceptable. I'm done making excuses for your selfishness. And I'm done allowing you to take advantage of my generosity. What does that mean? It means no more financial help, no more free dinners, no more gifts, no more treating you like family until you start acting like family. You can't do that. Watch me. I hung up and walked into the kitchen where George was still reading his paper. He looked up when he saw my face. Jessica? He asked. Jessica. She's upset because having to return my bag embarrassed her at work. George folded his paper with deliberate precision. And I told her that the Bank of Eleanor is officially closed. George smiled for the first time in days. Good for you. But my satisfaction was short-lived. 2 hours later, Michael called. Mom, what did you say to Jessica? She's been crying for the past hour. I told her the truth about her behavior. You attacked her. You made her feel unwelcome in our family. Michael, Jessica made herself unwelcome when she decided to steal from me and then complain about having to return what she stole. She didn't steal anything. God, you're being so dramatic about this. Am I? Michael, let me ask you something. Do you remember when you were 16 and you took $20 from my purse without asking? What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what happened when I found out? Michael was quiet for a moment. You grounded me for a month and made me pay you back. That's right, because taking things that don't belong to you is stealing, regardless of whether you're family or not. And when you steal from someone, there are consequences. But this is different. Jessica's not some teenager taking money for arcade games. You're right. She's a 35-year-old woman who should know better, which makes her behavior even more inexcusable. Mom, you're going to destroy our marriage over this. The threat was clear, and it hit its intended target. Michael knew that my greatest fear was losing him completely. Michael, if your marriage can't survive your wife being asked to return stolen property, then your marriage has bigger problems than my reaction to theft. Jessica's talking about cutting contact with you completely. She says she can't be around someone who treats her so badly. That's her choice to make. And if she cuts contact, I'll have to support her. I won't choose between my wife and my mother, but I won't let you continue to hurt her either. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not from sadness, but from exhaustion. I was tired of fighting for basic respect. I was tired of being treated like a bank account with feelings. I was tired of being blamed for other people's bad behavior. George found me there an hour later and sat down beside me without a word. They're going to cut us off, I said. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. I looked at him in surprise. George, he's our son. He's our son, but he's not acting like our family. Eleanor, when did we start accepting behavior from Michael that we would never tolerate from anyone else? That's when I realized George was right. I'd been so afraid of losing Michael that I'd allowed him and Jessica to treat me with disrespect and contempt. I'd enabled their behavior by refusing to set boundaries or enforce consequences. What do we do now? I asked. Now we live our lives. We stop walking on eggshells around people who don't appreciate us. We stop giving our love and support to people who see it as an entitlement rather than a gift. That evening, as George and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about managing someone else's emotions or preventing someone else's disappointment. I was free. The peace lasted exactly 12 days. Then Jessica's mother called. Eleanor, this is Patricia Morrison, Jessica's mother. I hope you don't mind me calling, but Jessica gave me your number. I'd met Patricia exactly twice in 3 years, at Michael and Jessica's wedding, and at their housewarming party. Both times she'd seemed pleasant enough, though I'd noticed she had the same passive-aggressive communication style as her daughter. Of course, Patricia. How are you? Well, I'm concerned, actually, about this situation between you and Jessica. Here we go, I thought. The mother coming to fight her adult daughter's battles. What situation is that, Patricia? The situation with the gifts your husband brought back from Europe. Jessica explained what happened, and I have to say, I'm shocked. Shocked by what? By your reaction. I mean, I understand being upset, but to threaten police involvement and cut off all financial support over a misunderstanding seems excessive. A misunderstanding. That's what we were calling theft now. Patricia, there was no misunderstanding. Jessica took gifts that belonged to me without permission. That's theft. But Eleanor, they're family. When my daughter Amy borrowed my pearl necklace without asking for her college formal, I didn't call it theft. That's what families do. They share. Did Amy take your necklace from your bedroom, wear it to public events, post pictures of it on social media claiming it was a gift to her, and then argue with you when you asked for it back? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Well, no, but because that's what Jessica did. And when I asked for my things back, she told me I was selfish and that she deserved them more than I did. Jessica feels terrible about this whole thing. She never meant to cause problems. She just loved that bag so much, and she thought you wouldn't mind sharing. Thought I wouldn't mind. Another convenient assumption that allowed Jessica to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. Patricia, did Jessica tell you that she used my perfume? That she ate my chocolates? That she wore my bag out in public multiple times? She mentioned that she'd tried the perfume, yes. But Eleanor, these are just things. Surely your relationship with your daughter-in-law is more important than material possessions. I was getting really tired of being lectured about what should be important to me, especially by people who seemed to think that my possessions were community property, but their daughter's feelings were sacred. Patricia, let me ask you something. If I came to your house and took your wedding ring because I thought it was beautiful and I wanted to wear it, how would you feel? That's different. My wedding ring has sentimental value. And you don't think gifts from my husband have sentimental value to me? Well, I suppose, but there's no but, Patricia. Jessica stole from me. When confronted, she refused to admit wrongdoing and instead blamed me for being selfish. This isn't about material possessions. It's about respect. Patricia sighed dramatically. I just think you're being hard on her. Jessica comes from a family that doesn't have much money. She's not used to having beautiful things. Surely you can understand her excitement about finally having something luxurious. And there it was, the class argument. The suggestion that because Jessica's family had less money, she was somehow entitled to take things from people who had more. Patricia, my financial situation doesn't obligate me to share my personal belongings with your daughter. If Jessica wants luxurious things, she can save her money and buy them like everyone else. That's a very cold attitude. Eleanor, I raised Jessica to believe that family takes care of each other. Taking care of each other doesn't mean stealing from each other. You're being very judgmental. Not everyone was born with advantages. Born with advantages. As if my comfortable life had been handed to me on a silver platter instead of earned through decades of hard work, careful financial planning, and sacrifice. Patricia, I wasn't born with advantages. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through nursing school. George and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment for the first 5 years of our marriage because we were saving for a house. We drove used cars for 15 years. We ate mac and cheese for dinner more times than I can count. Every advantage we have now was earned. But surely now that you're comfortable, you can afford to be generous with family. I am generous with family. I've helped Michael and Jessica with their house down payment, their car repairs, their emergency expenses. I've hosted every holiday for 3 years. I've given Jessica jewelry, clothes, and money for various occasions. I've been generous to a fault, but generosity has limits, and those limits include not having my personal belongings stolen. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a cooler tone. I think you need to consider what's really important here, Eleanor. Jessica is hurt and upset. Michael is caught in the middle. You're destroying your family relationships over material things. No, Patricia. Jessica destroyed our relationship when she decided to steal from me. I'm simply refusing to pretend it didn't happen. After I hung up, I realized something important. This phone call hadn't been about Jessica's hurt feelings or family harmony. It had been a reconnaissance mission. Patricia had been testing my resolve, seeing if she could guilt me into backing down. The fact that Jessica had sent her mother to fight this battle told me everything I needed to know about my daughter-in-law's character. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't embarrassed. She was strategizing. That evening, George and I were having dinner when my phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. Mom, we need to talk. Jessica's family is getting involved now, and this is getting out of hand. We need to find a way to resolve this before it destroys our entire family. I showed the text to George, who read it with a grim expression. He's right about one thing, George said. This is destroying our family. But not in the way he thinks. What do you mean? I mean, this situation has revealed who our family really is. It's shown us that Michael prioritizes Jessica's wants over your rights. It's shown us that Jessica feels entitled to anything she desires. And it's shown us that they're both willing to recruit other people to pressure you into accepting unacceptable behavior. I stared at my phone, reading Michael's text again. The words, "before it destroys our entire family," stood out like a threat. "George," I said slowly, "I think our family was already destroyed. We just didn't want to see it." "Maybe destruction isn't always a bad thing," George replied. "Sometimes you have to tear down something broken before you can build something better." That night, lying in bed, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the family peacekeeper. I was done sacrificing my dignity to preserve relationships with people who didn't respect me. And I was definitely done allowing my son and daughter-in-law to treat me like their personal ATM. Tomorrow, I would start building something better. But first, I had some calls to make. The first call I made was to our attorney, David Richardson. At 8 in the morning, I was sitting in his office explaining the situation while George provided moral support and documentation. "So, let me understand this correctly," David said, reviewing the receipts George had brought. "Your son took approximately $8,000 worth of gifts without permission, gave them to his wife, and when confronted, he threatened to withhold access to future grandchildren unless you allowed the theft to continue?" "That's exactly right," I confirmed. David leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Eleanor, what you're describing isn't just theft, it's financial elder abuse. In Virginia, adult children who exploit their elderly parents can face serious legal consequences." "I'm not sure I want to press charges," I said carefully. "I just want this behavior to stop." "I understand. But there are other steps we can take to protect you." David pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "I'd recommend updating your will immediately. Remove Michael as executor and beneficiary until this situation is resolved. We should also establish a trust that prevents anyone from accessing your assets without your explicit written consent." George nodded approvingly. "I like that idea. Additionally," David continued, "I'd suggest documenting every interaction you have with them going forward. Save text messages, record phone calls if Virginia law permits, keep receipts for any money you give them. Create a paper trail." By the time we left David's office, I felt more in control than I had in weeks. We'd scheduled an appointment for the following week to completely revise our estate planning, removing Michael as beneficiary and establishing safeguards against future financial exploitation. The second call I made was to my sister Margaret in California. "Eleanor, what a nice surprise. How are you and George doing?" "We've been better." "Maggie, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." I explained the entire situation, from the stolen gifts to Michael's threats about grandchildren. Margaret listened without interruption, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I described Jessica's social media posts. "That little witch," Margaret said when I finished. "Eleanor, I've never liked that girl. There's something calculating about her. You never said anything. Would you have listened? You were so happy that Michael had found someone. But I've been watching Jessica at family gatherings for 3 years, and she's always evaluating what everyone has, what everyone's worth. She looks at your house like she's taking inventory." Margaret's words hit uncomfortably close to home. I remembered Jessica's tours of our house during her first visit, the way she'd commented on the value of our artwork, the casual questions about our retirement plans. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "Remember last Christmas when she was asking all those questions about your jewelry? About whether you'd had it appraised recently? I'd forgotten about that conversation. Jessica had shown unusual interest in my wedding ring, asking where we'd bought it, whether it had increased in value over the years, whether I'd ever considered updating the insurance coverage. She was casing the place," Margaret said bluntly. "Eleanor, I think this bag incident is just the beginning. I think Jessica's been planning to get her hands on your assets for a while now." After talking to Margaret, I started seeing the past 3 years differently. Jessica's interest in our financial planning wasn't familial concern, it was reconnaissance. Her suggestions about updating our wills for tax purposes weren't helpful advice. They were attempts to influence our estate planning. Her questions about our insurance policies weren't casual conversation, they were information gathering. The third call I made was to my neighbor, Helen Carter, who'd been a private investigator before retiring. Helen, I need a favor. Can you teach me how to research someone's background? Eleanor, what are you up to? I'm learning things about my daughter-in-law that are making me question everything I thought I knew about her. 2 hours later, Helen was in my kitchen with her laptop, showing me how to search public records, court documents, and social media histories. The trick, Helen explained, is knowing where to look and what questions to ask. Start with basic background checks, criminal records, civil lawsuits, bankruptcy filings. Then move to social media, not just current accounts, but deleted posts and archived content. What we found made my blood run cold. Jessica Morrison had been married before, not just engaged, not just in a long-term relationship, married in Nevada, 3 years before she met Michael. The marriage had lasted 18 months and ended in divorce with allegations of financial misconduct. Look at this, Helen said, pointing to a court document on her screen. Her first husband filed for divorce, citing misappropriation of marital assets and fraudulent financial behavior. He accused her of stealing money from their joint accounts and running up credit card debt in his name. There was more. Jessica had been involved in 2 civil lawsuits in the past 5 years, both involving disputes over borrowed money that was never repaid. In one case, she'd borrowed $15,000 from a former colleague for what she claimed was a medical emergency. When the colleague discovered Jessica had used the money for a vacation to Europe, she sued for repayment. Eleanor, Helen said quietly, your daughter-in-law is a con artist. She targets people with money and manipulates them into giving her access to their assets. Does Michael know any of this? That's a good question. Let's find out. Helen showed me how to search for marriage records in our county. What we discovered was that Jessica had listed herself as never married on her marriage license application with Michael. She'd lied about her entire past. That evening, I sat George down and showed him everything we'd found. The color drained from his face as he read through the court documents and financial records. Our son married a criminal, he said finally. Our son married a criminal who lied to him about her past and has been planning to steal from us since the day she walked into our family. George was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. Then he looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen. Cold determination. Eleanor, we're going to destroy her. What do you mean? I mean we're going to expose exactly who Jessica Morrison really is. And then we're going to watch our son make a choice between his lying, stealing wife and his family. The next morning, I called Michael and asked him to come over without Jessica. We need to have a family conversation, I told him. Just the 3 of us. Michael arrived at noon, his face already set in defensive lines before he even walked through the door. Mom, if this is about the bag again, sit down, Michael. George's voice brooked no argument. We have some things to show you. I placed the folder of documents Helen and I had compiled on the coffee table. Michael's eyes flicked to it nervously. What's this? This is information about your wife that she apparently forgot to mention before you married her. Michael's face went pale. What kind of information? The kind that explains why she's so interested in our financial situation, George said. The kind that reveals a pattern of behavior that includes theft, fraud, and lying about her past. I opened the folder and handed Michael the marriage certificate from Nevada. Did you know Jessica was married before? Michael stared at the document, his hands shaking slightly. That's not possible. She told me she'd never been married. She lied. She was married for 18 months to a man named David Chen. The marriage ended when he accused her of stealing money from their joint accounts. I handed him the divorce papers. Michael read them in silence, his face growing paler with each page. This could be someone else with the same name, he said weakly. Could be, except for this. I handed him a photograph from Jessica's social media account from 4 years ago. A wedding photo with David Chen, clearly labeled with the date and location. Michael stared at the photo for a full minute without speaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. Why didn't she tell me? Because people who make a living deceiving others don't usually advertise their methods, George said bluntly. Michael, your wife is a con artist. She targets financially stable people, gains their trust, and then systematically steals from them. I handed him the civil lawsuit documents. She borrowed $15,000 from a colleague, claiming it was for medical bills. She used it to take a vacation to Europe. Sound familiar? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. She said she'd never been to Europe before our honeymoon. Another lie. She's been to Europe at least 3 times that we can document. All funded by money she borrowed under false pretenses. Michael, George said gently, how much money have you given Jessica since you've been married? I don't. We share everything. We have joint accounts. How much money did you have in savings before you married her? Michael was quiet for a long moment. About $40,000. How much do you have now? We're behind on some bills. Jessica said it was because of the economy. George and I exchanged looks. Michael, we need you to check your credit report. We need you to look at your bank statements for the past 3 years, and we need you to find out exactly where your money has gone. After Michael left, George and I sat in our kitchen, feeling like we'd just dropped a bomb on our own family. But the explosive device had been planted 3 years ago when Jessica walked into our lives. We'd just finally decided to defuse it. That evening, Michael called. Mom, I've been going through our financial records. His voice sounded hollow. There are withdrawals I don't remember making, credit card charges for things I never bought, loan applications I never signed. Oh, Michael, she's stolen over $60,000 from me over the past 3 years. I've been working overtime to pay bills that she created with purchases I knew nothing about. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. Michael, I'm so sorry. No, Mom, I'm sorry. I let her manipulate me into believing that you were the problem. I let her convince me that you were selfish and unreasonable when she was the one who was stealing from all of us. What are you going to do? I'm going to confront her. Tonight. And depending on what she says, I'm going to decide whether to file for divorce or call the police. Michael, be careful. If she's desperate, she might what? Steal my identity? Empty our bank accounts? Disappear in the middle of the night? Mom, she's already done all of that. 2 hours later, Michael called back. She's gone, he said simply. What do you mean, gone? I mean, she's cleared out her clothes, her jewelry, her personal items. She left a note saying she needed space to think about our relationship, and she transferred the last $800 from our joint account into an account I can't access. Michael, you need to call the police. I already did. They're treating it as identity theft and fraud. Apparently, she's done this before in other states. The FBI has a file on her. I sat down hard on my kitchen stool. The FBI. She's part of a larger investigation into marriage fraud. She specifically targets older men with assets or men from wealthy families. She marries them, steals everything she can, and disappears. How did she find you? Michael's laugh was bitter. Dating websites. She targeted men whose profiles indicated family wealth or inheritance prospects. She chose me because she researched you and Dad online and found out about Dad's business success. The calculating nature of Jessica's deception was breathtaking. She hadn't fallen in love with Michael. She'd hunted him like prey. Michael, come home, I said. Come stay with us until you figure out your next steps. Mom, I don't deserve... You deserve to be loved by people who care about you more than your bank account. You deserve to have your mother take care of you when you're hurting. And you deserve to know that your family will always be here for you, no matter what mistakes you've made. When Michael arrived that night with 2 suitcases and a devastated expression, George and I welcomed him home like the prodigal son he was, because that's what family does when the con artists and thieves have finally been exposed. We take care of our own. Living with Michael again after 3 years reminded me of why I'd loved being his mother so much. Away from Jessica's influence, he was thoughtful, funny, and genuinely remorseful about how he'd treated us. But it also revealed the extent of the psychological manipulation he'd endured. She convinced me that you were jealous of her, Michael told me one morning over coffee. She said you resented having to share my attention and that you were trying to drive a wedge between us. I poured myself another cup, trying to process how efficiently Jessica had turned my son against me. She had an explanation for everything, Michael continued. When you'd offer to help with something, she'd say you were being controlling. When you'd give her gifts, she'd say you were trying to buy her affection. When you'd include her in family activities, she'd say you were being possessive of family traditions. Michael, how did we not see this? Because she was good at it, Mom. Really good. She'd wait until you were out of the room to make her comments. She'd phrase things as concerns about family dynamics rather than direct criticisms, and she'd always follow up with something sweet, like how much she loved being part of our family despite the challenges. Over the following days, more details emerged about Jessica's systematic manipulation. She'd been monitoring our phone calls, encouraging Michael to share details about our conversations. She'd been going through our mail when she visited, photographing bank statements and investment documents. She'd even convinced Michael to install a tracking app on his phone so she could monitor who he talked to and where he went. She said it was for safety, Michael explained, looking embarrassed. She said married couples should be completely transparent with each other. The investigation into Jessica's background revealed an even more disturbing pattern. In the past 8 years, she'd been married 4 times under different names. Each marriage had followed the same script: target a financially stable man, gain access to his assets, steal everything possible, and disappear when confronted. Detective Sarah Morrison, no relation, thankfully, from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, called to update us on the investigation. Mrs. Parker, your daughter-in-law's real name is Jennifer Walsh. She's been operating under false identities for the better part of a decade. The Jessica Morrison identity was completely fabricated. Stolen social security number, fake employment history, created credit profile. How is that possible? Identity theft has become incredibly sophisticated. She steals personal information from deceased individuals and builds entire false personas. The Jessica Morrison who married your son never actually existed. The depth of the deception was staggering. The woman who'd sat at our dinner table, shared our holidays, and lived in our family for 3 years was a complete fiction. Detective Morrison, what happens now? We've issued warrants for her arrest in 5 states. She's facing charges for identity theft, wire fraud, marriage fraud, and multiple counts of theft. When we find her, she'll be going to prison for a very long time. After I hung up, I found Michael sitting on our back porch, staring at nothing. I keep thinking about all the times she said she loved me, he said, without looking up. How am I supposed to know if anything about our relationship was real? I sat down beside him. Michael, con artists are good at mimicking real emotions. That's how they're successful. But that doesn't mean you're stupid for believing her. I defended her against you. Mom, I chose her over my own family. No, you chose what you thought was love over what you thought was unfair criticism. There's a difference. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching George tend to his tomato plants. Finally, Michael spoke again. How do I trust anyone again? How do I know if someone genuinely cares about me or just sees me as a target? It was a question I couldn't answer easily. Jessica had damaged more than Michael's finances. She'd shattered his ability to trust his own judgment. I think, I said carefully, that you start by rebuilding relationships with people who've proven their love over time. People who were here before Jessica and will be here long after she's forgotten. Like you and Dad. Like me and Dad. Like your sister when she calls from Portland. Like your friends who tried to warn you about Jessica but backed off when you didn't want to hear it. People tried to warn me? Michael, half our neighborhood was talking about Jessica's behavior at the Hendersons' barbecue last summer. The way she kept asking intrusive questions about everyone's finances and making comments about their possessions. Mrs. Patterson actually asked me if everything was okay because Jessica's behavior seemed predatory. Michael buried his face in his hands. God, I was such an idiot. No, you were a victim. There's a difference, and it's important that you understand that. That evening, George suggested we all go out to dinner, the first family meal we'd shared without Jessica's presence in 3 years. I feel like I can breathe again, Michael said over dessert, like I've been holding my breath for 3 years and I'm finally able to exhale. What do you want to do now? George asked. About work? About where you'll live? About your future? I want to rebuild. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not being manipulated and controlled. And I want to make things right with you and Mom. Things are already right, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. The moment you walked back through our door, things were right. But even as I said it, I knew there was one more revelation coming. Something Detective Morrison had mentioned in passing during our phone call. Something about Jessica's pattern of behavior that hadn't quite made sense yet. Something that would change everything we thought we knew about why she'd targeted our family specifically. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Jessica had disappeared. Detective Morrison's voice was grim when I answered. Mrs. Parker, we've arrested Jennifer Walsh in Miami. She was attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with false identification. That's wonderful news. There's something else. Something you need to know about why she targeted your family specifically. I sat down, sensing that whatever was coming would be significant. Mrs. Parker, Jennifer Walsh didn't randomly select your son through online dating. She specifically researched and targeted your family based on information she received from someone who knew you personally. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Someone provided her with detailed information about your family's financial situation, your routines, your relationships, even your emotional vulnerabilities. This wasn't a random con. It was a carefully orchestrated inside job. Who? We're still investigating, but based on phone records and financial transactions, we believe Jennifer was working with an accomplice, someone who had intimate knowledge of your family dynamics. After I hung up, I called George and Michael into the kitchen. George's face went white when I explained what Detective Morrison had told me. Someone we know set us up, he said slowly. But who? Michael asked. Who would have that kind of detailed information about our family? We spent the next hour making a list of everyone who knew about our financial situation, our routines, our family relationships. The list was shorter than I'd expected. Immediate family, our attorney, our financial advisor, a few close friends. That's when George's expression changed. Eleanor, remember when Jessica was asking all those questions about our estate planning last Christmas? Yes, she wasn't just making conversation. She was confirming information she already had. What do you mean? George was quiet for a long moment, his face growing darker. There's only one person outside our immediate family who knows the details of our will, our investment accounts, our insurance policies. Understanding hit me like a physical blow. David Richardson, our attorney, the man we've trusted with our most sensitive financial information for 15 years. Michael looked confused. But we just met with him about updating the will. He was helping us protect our assets. Or he was finding out how much damage Jessica had done and whether we suspected anything, George said grimly. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. David had been unusually interested in our family dynamics during our recent meeting. He'd asked detailed questions about Michael's relationship with Jessica, about our concerns regarding their marriage. At the time, I'd thought he was being thorough. Now I realized he might have been gathering intelligence. We need to call Detective Morrison, I said. An hour later, Detective Morrison was sitting in our living room with an FBI financial crimes specialist, taking detailed notes about our relationship with David Richardson. How long has Mr. Richardson been your attorney? Detective Morrison asked. 15 years, George replied, since we moved to Virginia. And he has access to all your financial information? Everything. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies, real estate holdings, business assets. He's drafted our wills, handled our tax planning, managed our estate documents. The FBI specialist looked up from her notes. Mrs. Parker, we've been tracking Jennifer Walsh's activities for 2 years. She's part of a larger network that includes professionals who provide inside information about potential targets, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors who sell client information to con artists. David sold our information? We're still investigating, but the timing is suspicious. Jennifer Walsh arrived in Virginia and began targeting your son exactly 6 months after you and Mr. Richardson updated your estate planning. That's when she would have learned about the size of your estate and your family dynamics. My head was spinning. David Richardson had been more than our attorney. He'd been our friend. He'd attended George's birthday parties. His wife had been in my book club. We'd trusted him with our most sensitive information for 15 years. How do we prove it? George asked. We're obtaining warrants for his phone records, email accounts, and financial transactions. If he's been selling client information, we'll find evidence. That evening, after the investigators left, the 3 of us sat in stunned silence. 15 years, George said finally. 15 years of trusting someone who was selling us out. How many other clients has he betrayed? I wondered aloud. Michael was staring at his hands. This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so easy to manipulate, none of this would have happened. No, I said firmly. This happened because people we trusted betrayed that trust. You were a victim, Michael, not a co-conspirator. The next morning brought another devastating revelation. Detective Morrison called with an update on their investigation. Mrs. Parker, we found evidence that Mr. Richardson has been selling client information for at least 5 years. Jennifer Walsh was just one of several con artists he's been working with. We've identified at least 12 other victims in the Virginia area. 12 other families. 12 other families who've been targeted based on information David Richardson provided. The total theft amounts to over $2 million. I had to sit down. David Richardson hadn't just betrayed our family. He'd been running a criminal enterprise, selling the private information of dozens of clients to thieves and con artists. What happens now? Mr. Richardson will be arrested later today. We'll need you to testify about your relationship with him and the information he had access to. This is going to be a major case, Mrs. Parker. The betrayal of attorney-client privilege on this scale is extremely serious. After I hung up, I realized that this revelation changed everything about the past 3 years. Jessica's theft of my gifts hadn't been an impulsive act of greed. It had been part of a carefully planned campaign to steal everything we owned. David Richardson had provided her with a detailed roadmap of our family, our finances, and our vulnerabilities. But there was one more piece of the puzzle that still didn't fit. Something about the timing, about how quickly Jessica had gained Michael's trust, about how efficiently she'd isolated him from his family. Something that suggested this conspiracy went even deeper than we'd imagined. The final revelation came during David Richardson's arrest. Detective Morrison called me that evening with information that made everything else pale in comparison. "Mrs. Parker, we found something in Richardson's office that changes everything we thought we knew about this case." "What did you find?" "A file labeled Parker Family Long-Term Strategy. It contains detailed plans spanning 5 years, starting from when Jennifer Walsh would meet your son through when she would inherit your entire estate." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean, inherit our estate?" "Mrs. Parker, this wasn't just a theft operation. It was a murder plot." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what Detective Morrison was telling me. The plan was for Jennifer to marry Michael, gain access to your family, and then arrange for you and your husband to die in what would appear to be an accident. With Michael as your heir and Jennifer as his wife, she would inherit everything. How? How were they planning to kill us? The file contains detailed surveillance notes about your routines, your medical conditions, your travel plans. They were planning to sabotage your car during your annual trip to visit your sister in California next month. I started crying then, not from sadness, but from a combination of terror and rage that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "Mrs. Parker, are you there?" "Yes," I managed to whisper. "There's more." Richardson wasn't just selling information to random con artists. He was specifically targeting elderly clients with substantial estates and adult children who could be manipulated. He's been orchestrating inheritance fraud schemes for years. How many people have they killed? We're investigating at least 6 suspicious deaths of Richardson's clients over the past 3 years. All elderly individuals who died in apparent accidents shortly after their children married people who turned out to have false identities. The magnitude of the conspiracy was beyond anything I could have imagined. David Richardson had been running a murder-for-hire scheme disguised as inheritance fraud, using con artists like Jessica to infiltrate families and eliminate obstacles to their inheritance. Detective Morrison, how close did they come to succeeding with us? Too close, Mrs. Parker. If you hadn't discovered the theft of your gifts when you did, if you hadn't started investigating Jessica's background, you and your husband would likely be dead within the next month. After I hung up, I called George and Michael into the living room and told them everything. George went completely white and had to sit down. Michael started vomiting. "They were going to kill you," Michael said through his tears. "They were going to murder my parents and make me inherit your money so Jessica could steal it." "But they didn't succeed," I said firmly. "Because sometimes, Michael, a mother's instinct to protect her beautiful things leads to protecting much more important things." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. My selfish reaction to having my gifts stolen had saved our lives. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded into a national case. David Richardson's network had been operating in 12 states, using similar schemes to defraud and murder wealthy elderly clients. The FBI estimated that over 50 people had been killed as part of Richardson's inheritance fraud operation. Jennifer Walsh pleaded guilty to murder conspiracy, identity theft, and fraud in exchange for a life sentence without parole. David Richardson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for orchestrating multiple murders and running a criminal enterprise that spanned over a decade. Michael slowly began to heal from the psychological damage of his manipulation, with the help of a therapist who specialized in recovery from abusive relationships. And me? I learned something important about the difference between selfishness and self-preservation. Sometimes refusing to be taken advantage of isn't about protecting your possessions, it's about protecting your life. 6 months later, as I was organizing my jewelry box, I came across the Hermes bag that had started everything. The bag that had led to the discovery of Jessica's theft, which had led to the investigation of her background, which had led to the exposure of a murder conspiracy that would have killed George and me. I picked up the bag and ran my fingers over its buttery leather, thinking about how something so beautiful had been the key to revealing something so ugly. George found me there, holding the bag and smiling. "Thinking about getting rid of it?" he asked. "No," I said, putting it carefully back in its place. I'm thinking about how sometimes the things that seem least important turn out to be the most valuable of all. How so? That bag saved our lives, George. My selfish attachment to a material possession led to uncovering a plot to murder us. Maybe being protective of the things we love, whether they're people or possessions, isn't such a bad thing after all. George kissed the top of my head. You know what this means, don't you? What? It means I'm buying you an even more expensive bag for Christmas, for protection purposes, of course. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months, because sometimes survival comes wrapped in burgundy leather and tied with a bow, and sometimes the best way to save your family is to refuse to let anyone steal your joy, even when they call you selfish for keeping what's yours. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.